The wind swept across the wide Arizona plains, carrying dust and the smell of rain that never quite came. The sun was slipping behind the distant mesas, leaving the world painted in shades of rust and gold. In that lonely hour, a woman stood at the edge of a ravine, one hand resting on the curve of her belly, the other gripping the rifle she had learned to fire only out of desperation. Her heart pounded against her ribs, not from fear of the wilderness, but from what was coming for her. Behind her lay the Apache camp, silent now, yet she could feel the weight of their eyes even across the distance. She had once believed she could find safety there, among the people she had been taught to fear. But the line between friend and enemy had blurred long ago. Now, as thunder rolled across the desert sky, she knew the tribe's patience had run dry. She had crossed boundaries that neither side forgave easily, and she was carrying a secret that bound her fate tighter than chains ever could. It all began on a morning that smelled of smoke and sorrow. The woman had been traveling west with a wagon train bound for California, escaping a past that refused to stay buried. The land was cruel to outsiders, the heat unrelenting, the silence heavy enough to crush a soul. They had made camp near a dry creek bed when the riders came Apache warriors, painted and fierce, moving like ghosts through the brush. The men of the wagon train reached for their guns, but it was already too late. In minutes, the wagons were burning. When it was over, only she remained alive. Not by chance, but because one of the warriors had stopped the others. He had looked at her not with pity, but with something unreadable in his dark, steady eyes. He had spared her life when he didn't have to. That moment became the start of something neither of them could have predicted. They called him Taza, a name whispered with both fear and respect. He was known for his silence, for the way he carried himself like a shadow carved from stone. The others followed him without question. Yet, when he brought the woman into the camp, they murmured among themselves. A white woman among the Apache was a danger in itself, a burden, a reminder of wars not long forgotten. At first she was kept under watch, made to stay by the edge of the settlement. The women avoided her, the children stared, and the men never turned their backs. But she was not weak. The days stretched into weeks, and slowly began to understand their ways of the rhythm of their songs, the meaning of the fires they built at night, the way they spoke through gestures more than words. And through it all, Taza watched her, never cruel, never kind, just watching. One evening, a storm rolled over the hills. The wind howled, tearing at the camp, and lightning split the sky in two. She had gone to fetch water from the stream when she saw him, Taza, pinned beneath a fallen horse, blood darkening the earth around him. Without thinking, she dropped her bucket and ran. The sound of thunder covered her cries as she struggled to lift the weight.
Ow.
Her hands trembling, her dress soaked through with rain. Somehow, she freed him, dragged him beneath a shelter, stayed with him through the night. By dawn, his fever had broken. The tribe found them together, her shawl wrapped around his wounds. Whispers spread like fire through the camp. To save an Apache warrior was one thing. To touch him, to tend him as a wife. But that was another. Still, she stayed. The days that followed brought a quiet understanding between them, a wordless bond. He taught her to ride their ponies, to track the movement of deer through the sand, to listen to the earth. She in turn taught him fragments of her language, simple words that made him smile. A rare sight that softened the hard lines of his face. But peace in that world was never meant to last. When a group of soldiers arrived near the valley, the fragile balance shattered. They came searching for her, claiming she had been taken by force. She tried to explain that she was there by choice, but her voice meant little against the sound of rifles and the orders of men who didn't see the truth. That night, as bullets tore through the dark, she shielded Taza with her own body. Dragging him to safety beneath the rocks by the river, he was wounded again, his blood staining her hands. And when the fighting stopped, the soldiers were gone. Leaving only silence and smoke behind, she nursed him back from death once more, hiding him in a cave far from the others. There, surrounded by the whispering wind and the sound of distant coyotes, she realized what her heart already knew. What had begun as fear had turned into something deeper, something forbidden. But love, like the desert storm, didn't ask permission before it came. Weeks passed. When they returned to the camp, the world had changed. The elders looked at her with suspicion. The warriors spoke in low voices, their faces carved in stone. Rumors spread faster than the wind rumors about what had happened in the cave, about what she carried now beneath her heart. She said nothing, yet her silence said enough. The women would no longer speak to her. The old healer refused to bring her water. Only Taza stood between her and the wrath of his people. But even he could not shield her forever. The Apache had their laws, older than any government, older than any preacher's word. To bear a child that crossed the lines of blood was to call down curses upon both. One night, as the moon hung low and the drums echoed across the camp, she heard them gathering. The voices rose, angry, sharp as knives. They were calling for her name, demanding that Taza choose between his tribe and the woman who had saved him. She pressed her hand against her belly, feeling the faint pulse of life beneath. Fear coiled in her chest, but she didn't run. Not yet. Taza stood before the fire, his eyes dark with conflict. The chief spoke, his voice hard as flint, naming the laws she had broken. The others shouted for judgment, for exile. Taza said nothing for a long time. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away into the night. The tribe watched him go, and no one followed. The woman waited until the fire burned low. She sat outside her small shelter, the desert cold creeping around her. She thought of the road that had led her here, of all she had lost and found in this unforgiving land. Somewhere out in the darkness, Taza was making a choice that would seal both their fates. The next morning, she woke to silence. The camp was still, too still. Smoke rose in thin trails from the dying fires. Her heartbeat quickened as she looked toward the horizon. A single rider was approaching through the dust. The rising sun caught the edge of his spear, turning it to flame. She couldn't tell if it was Taza or someone sent to end what they had begun. She stood, hand trembling over her stomach as the rider drew closer. The tribe's eyes turned toward her once more. Her throat tightened, her breath shallow. Whatever happened next, there would be no turning back. The horse stopped only a few yards away. The rider dismounted, silent, his face hidden beneath the shadow of his war paint. He reached for something in his hand and raised it high. The wind carried the faint cry of an eagle overhead, circling, waiting. Then the man spoke her name. And in that moment, she realized whatever he had come to say would change everything forever. The man stepped closer, his boots stirring the dust around her feet. The woman's breath caught as the light fell across his face. It was Taza, though something in his eyes had changed. The calm that once lived there had been replaced by a storm. He looked worn, his clothes torn, the paint on his skin faded by travel and struggle. Yet even in that state, he stood tall, his presence commanding the space around them. The tribe's people gathered quietly, forming a circle of eyes and whispers. The air felt thick, heavy with judgment and fear. Taza said nothing for a long while. He only looked at her, his gaze flicking from her face to the small curve of her belly that she could no longer hide. She wanted to speak, to explain, but the words refused to come. Every sound around them seemed distant, the crackle of the dying fires, the soft cry of a child somewhere in the camp, the wind sighing through the dry grass. Finally, Taza lifted the object he carried. It was a carved piece of bone, smooth and worn from handling. A token of protection, used by the elders in times of great trial. He placed it gently on the ground between them, as if to mark a boundary neither of them could cross. Then he turned to face the tribe. His voice, when it came, was low and steady. He spoke in their language, words she had come to understand only in pieces. The elders listened, their expressions hard to read. Some nodded, others shook their heads. She could tell he was defending her, speaking of the night she saved his life, of the storms they had endured together. But every word seemed to deepen the divide. When he finished, the old chief stood, his weathered face set with sorrow. The chief spoke briefly, and his words were met with murmurs of agreement. Whatever decision they had made was final. Taz's jaw tightened. The woman felt the world sway beneath her. The chief pointed toward the mountains, a sign she understood all too well. Exile. The tribe would not harm her, but they would cast her out. She would have to leave before the next sunrise, taking nothing with her. Taza, bound by their laws, could not follow. The punishment was not only hers, it was his as well. To protect her meant turning his back on the tribe forever. That night, she sat alone outside her shelter, her mind a storm of thoughts. The stars were sharp and cold above her, scattered like shards of broken glass. Somewhere beyond the camp, she could hear the river murmuring over the stones, a sound that had always comforted her. Now, it only reminded her of everything she would lose come morning. Taza came to her in the darkness, his footsteps soft against the earth. He knelt beside her, his face half hidden in shadow. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, he reached out and touched her hand. It was a small gesture, but it carried more weight than words ever could. "You must go," he said quietly. "They will not stop until you do." She shook her head, her eyes wet. "And you?" He hesitated, then looked toward the firelight where his people slept. "If I follow, I betray them. If I stay, I lose you." The wind whispered between them. There was no right choice, only pain waiting on either side. She wanted to tell him everything. She felt the gratitude, the fear, the love, but her voice trembled. He seemed to understand without hearing it. Before leaving, he placed something in her hand, a small leather pouch containing a few grains of corn and a flint stone. "The land will feed you," he said, "and this will light your fire. When the moon turns full again, I will come find you." He rose to go, but she caught his arm. "What if they follow me?" He looked toward the horizon. "Then you must keep moving. The desert will test you, but it will also hide you. Trust it." She nodded, though fear pressed against her chest like a weight. He left without another word, his shadow melting into the darkness. By dawn, the camp was stirring. She packed what little she had, a blanket, a canteen, the pouch he gave her hand, walked toward the open desert. No one stopped her. No one spoke. The silence of their rejection was heavier than stones. When she reached the edge of the valley, she looked back one last time. Taza stood in the distance, watching. She lifted her hand slightly, a farewell neither could say aloud. Then she turned away and kept walking. The land stretched endlessly ahead, a harsh sea of dust and rock. The sun climbed higher, burning her skin, but she did not stop. She thought of the life growing inside her, of the tiny heartbeat she sometimes felt at night when the world was still. It gave her strength she didn't know she had. By the second night, exhaustion began to take hold. Her feet were blistered, her lips cracked. She found shelter beneath a cluster of boulders, lighting a small fire with the flint Taza had given her. The flames flickered weakly, dancing against the rock walls. For the first time, she allowed herself to cry, not from regret, but from the weight of everything she had endured. As the days passed, she learned to listen to the desert. The sound of wind through the canyons, the cry of hawks circling overhead, the rustle of lizards beneath the sand became her guide. When thirst threatened to break her, she remembered Taza's words, "The land will feed you." She found water where stones met the shadow, fruit in the thickets, shelter among the cliffs. But the desert was not the only thing watching her. One evening, as she gathered wood, she noticed tracks in the sand, fresh, human, too large to be her own. Her pulse quickened. She followed the prints to the ridge and saw smoke curling in the distance. Someone was out there, close enough to find her. That night she didn't sleep. Every sound seemed louder, the crack of twigs, the whisper of wind. When dawn came, she decided to move north, toward the mountains. It was the only place left where she might find safety. As she climbed, memories of her old life came in flashes: the wagon train, the fire, the moment she first met Taza. Back then, she had been broken, lost. Now, despite everything, she felt stronger. The fear had not left her, but it no longer ruled her. On the fourth day, she stumbled upon a small stream winding through a narrow gorge. She knelt and drank deeply, the cold water easing her thirst. That's when she heard it, the faint sound of hoofbeats echoing off the canyon walls. She froze, her heart hammering. The sound drew closer. She moved behind a rock, clutching the rifle that had survived the journey with her. A figure appeared at the far end of the gorge, mounted on a black horse. The rider was dressed in dust-covered clothes, a rifle slung across his back. She couldn't tell if he was friend or foe. Her fingers tightened on the trigger, though her hands shook. The man slowed his horse, scanning the rocks around him. Then he called out something she didn't understand. When he came closer, she saw that his skin was the same bronze tone as Taz's, though his hair was streaked with gray. His eyes, sharp and wary, landed on her hiding place. "You," he said in broken English, "come out. No harm." She hesitated, then slowly rose from behind the rock. The man studied her for a long moment before dismounting. "You are the one who walked from the valley," he said. "Taza spoke of you." Her breath caught. "You know him?" He nodded once. "He is my blood. But you have brought trouble to him. The council has sent men to find you." "To find me? Why?" "To make things right," he said. "They believe your being alive keeps his honor bound to shame. The old laws demand balance." The words chilled her. "They want me dead." The man's eyes softened, but he didn't deny it. "You must keep moving. The mountains will hide you for a while. When the moon turns, he will come." She wanted to ask more, but the man mounted his horse again and turned away. "Stay off the open land," he said, "and trust no one who carries a gun." Then he rode off into the fading light. Leaving her with the echo of his warning, she stood there long after he disappeared, staring at the empty horizon. The fear she thought she had buried returned stronger than before. Somewhere out there, men were riding to erase her existence. But she couldn't stop now. Too much had been lost already, and the life inside her was counting on her to survive. As night fell, she lit her small fire once again. The flames threw long shadows across the canyon walls. She pulled the blanket tight around her shoulders and listened to the wild silence. Above her, the stars began to appear one by one, watching, waiting. Somewhere beyond those distant ridges, Taza was out there, torn between duty and love, and she knew deep down that before the moon turned full again, their paths would cross once more, but whether that meeting would bring salvation or ruin, the desert would decide. The woman woke before dawn, startled by the sound of distant thunder. But as she sat up, she realized it wasn't thunder at all. It was the echo of hooves, several of them pounding against the hard desert floor. She pressed her back to the canyon wall, her breath shallow. The sound grew louder, then faded again, swallowed by the wind. Whoever was out there, they were moving fast. Heading north the same direction she was going, she packed her few belongings and began climbing higher into the mountains, careful not to leave tracks that could be followed. The air grew colder with every step, and the ground changed from sand to loose stone. The sky above her was gray, heavy with the promise of rain. By midday, she found a hollow between two cliffs where she could rest. She crouched there, her hands wrapped around her knees, listening for any sign of movement. Her thoughts drifted to Taza. She imagined him in the valley, facing his people's anger, torn between loyalty and love. She wondered if he was safe, if the tribe had turned against him fully, or if some still stood at his side. The memory of his last words echoed in her mind, "When the moon turns full again, I will come find you." But the days felt long, and the fear of what hunted her grew heavier with each passing hour. That evening, as she gathered dry wood for a small fire, she heard a faint cry, a human sound, sharp and weak. She froze. The call came again, from beyond a cluster of boulders. Against her better judgment, she followed it. On the other side, half buried under the dust and branches, lay a young boy. His leg was twisted beneath him, swollen and bruised. His eyes fluttered open as she knelt beside him. "Don't be afraid," she said softly. "I won't hurt you." The boy didn't answer, but his breathing was shallow, labored. From the color of his skin and the braid in his hair, she could tell he was Apache. He couldn't have been more than 12. She looked around, but there was no sign of anyone else nearby. Whoever he had been with had either abandoned him or gone for help. She carried him back to her small camp, wrapping him in her blanket and tending to his wound as best she could. The boy didn't speak much, but when he did, it was in broken English mixed with his native tongue. His name, she learned, was Coyote. He had been traveling with a hunting party when they were attacked by soldiers. He had run, but the horse had thrown him, leaving him stranded. For days, she cared for him. In return, Coyote shared what little he knew of what was happening beyond the mountains. He spoke of men searching the desert, both Apache and white soldiers, each claiming they were looking for justice. "They say you brought trouble," he told her one night, staring into the fire. "Some want to find you before Tazza does." The words sent a chill through her. "And what do they want to do when they find me?" she asked. Coyote didn't look up. "They say it is not right, what happened. That you brought a curse." She turned away, clutching her shawl tighter. The boy didn't mean harm. He was only repeating what he'd heard. But the truth of it settled deep inside her. No matter where she went, she carried both hope and danger within her. The days grew colder. Coyote's leg began to heal, though slowly. Together, they built small traps for rabbits and found water from the melting snow that trickled down the rocks. The woman began to feel a strange sense of calm in that lonely place. Yet each night, when she looked up at the sky, she felt the same tension pull at her heart. Somewhere out there, Tazza was coming for her, or the men who wanted her gone were. She didn't know which would reach her first. Then one morning, she was washing clothes by the stream. She saw a reflection in the water, glint of metal. She turned sharply. A man stood on the ridge above her, a rifle slung across his shoulder. Her body froze. The man didn't move for a long time, just watching her. His clothes were not Apache. He wore a dusty army coat, torn at the collar, his face unshaven and weary. "Don't run," he said finally. His voice was rough, but not unkind. "I'm not here to hurt you." She kept her distance, her hand instinctively resting over her stomach. "Who are you?" He stepped down the slope, slow and cautious. "Name's Harper. Used to ride with the cavalry before I saw too much of what they did." "You're the woman they're talking about, aren't you?" Her heart pounded. "What do you want?" He sighed, lowering the rifle. "Truth is, I don't know. Maybe just to understand why everyone's spilling blood over one woman." She didn't answer, and he didn't push. He looked around the camp, noticing Coyote sitting near the fire. The boy glared at him, his small hand gripping a stick like a weapon. Harper raised his hands. "Easy, kid. I'm not your enemy." Over the next few hours, they spoke little. Harper offered her some dried meat from his pack, and though she didn't trust him, hunger won out. As the fire burned low that night, he told her bits of his story, how he had left the army after seeing villages burned. Women and children driven into the desert, all in the name of peace. He said he'd been wandering ever since, looking for a place where the land still meant something. When she asked him why he came looking for her, he shrugged. "Heard about a white woman living among the Apache. Some say she's a traitor. Others say she's a ghost. I figured maybe she's just someone who made a choice no one could understand." She didn't correct him. Let him think what he wanted. But she noticed the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. It's like he saw something human in the story. Everyone else had turned into legend. The uneasy peace didn't last long. 2 nights later, while Harper was away gathering wood, the sound of horses shattered the quiet. She rushed to wake Coyote. From the shadows at the edge of the rocks, she saw them 3 riders, armed and moving fast. They carried torches and wore coats like Harper's, but their movements were sharper, more purposeful. Soldiers. She grabbed the boy's hand and pulled him behind the rocks. The riders dismounted near the stream, scanning the area. One of them shouted to the others, "She's close." "I can feel it." Her pulse roared in her ears. She could see the emblem on their jackets, the same as the men who had attacked the tribe weeks ago. They weren't just hunting her. They were hunting any Apache they could find. When Harper returned, he saw the soldiers before they saw him. He moved quietly to her side, whispering, "They're not mine. Stay down." The soldiers drew closer, their torches flickering against the canyon walls. Harper raised his rifle and aimed for the sky. One shot cracked through the night, echoing like thunder. The horses reared and the men shouted in confusion. "Run," Harper hissed. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed Keone and darted up the rocky path, the cold air burning her lungs. Behind her, she could hear the shouts of the soldiers and the sound of gunfire. The boy stumbled, but she pulled him along. Every step driven by the instinct to survive. They climbed until the noise faded. From the ridge above, she could see the faint glow of fire where the soldiers had been. Harper was going to whether captured or dead, she didn't know. Her throat tightened, but there was no time to grieve. She had to keep moving. By morning, they reached a plateau overlooking the valley below. The land stretched wide and endless, the same land that had given and taken everything from her. Keone was silent, his face pale. When she asked if he was all right, he only nodded. They rested under a ledge as the day warmed. She tried to believe Harper might still be alive, but the image of the flames below haunted her. The world was closing in on them. Soldiers from one side, Apache trackers from the other, a child who depended on her for life itself. As she watched the horizon, a single hawk circled high above them. It reminded her of the sign she'd seen before Taza returned, that Datha same steady wings gliding over the desert sky. A strange calm washed through her. Keone followed her gaze. "You think he will come?" he asked quietly. She smiled faintly. "He said he would." The boy nodded, his eyes filled with something between faith and fear. Below them, the wind carried faint echoes, distant shouts. The rhythm of drums, the kind the Apache used when preparing for battle. The sound rolled through the canyons, carried by the breath of the land itself. She closed her eyes, pressing a hand to her stomach. The child inside her shifted, a small movement that reminded her of why she couldn't stop now. Somewhere far below, a figure on horseback appeared, riding hard through the dust. The shape was too small to see clearly, but something in the way it moved made her heart leap. Whether it was Taza or another hunter, she couldn't tell. But one thing was certain: the desert had not finished with her yet. And before the moon turned full again, the truth of everything she had run from would come crashing down upon them all. The air grew still as the figure on horseback drew closer through the shimmering haze of the desert. The woman squinted against the light, her heart beating hard. Keone crouched beside her, clutching the edge of her shawl. From this distance, she could only see the silhouette, broad shoulders. A dark horse, a trail of dust that seemed to follow him like a shadow. She wanted to believe it was Taza, but something deep inside warned her not to hope too soon. The rider slowed at the base of the plateau, scanning the ridge where they hid. She could almost feel his eyes searching the rocks. Her pulse quickened. If he was one of the soldiers, their hiding place wouldn't hold for long. She reached for the rifle Harper had left behind, its barrel cool against her trembling hands. The wind carried a faint shoutwords in Apache. Though she couldn't catch the meaning, Keone's head lifted suddenly. "It's him," he whispered, eyes wide. "It's Taza." She hesitated, afraid to believe it, until she saw him raise a hand in the familiar signal he used before entering a camp. Relief washed through her like water after drought. But behind that relief came fear, sharper than before. If Taza had found her, the others might not be far behind. When he finally reached her, she could see the wear on his face. Dust, fatigue, a shadow of pain beneath his eyes. He dismounted without a word, closing the distance between them in a few steps. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he took her hand, rough fingers curling around hers. "You're alive," he said quietly, as if the words were both a prayer and a confession. She nodded, her throat tight. "They've been searching for me. The soldiers, your people, I don't know who's closer." Taz's gaze hardened. "The soldiers came through the valley. They burned what they couldn't find. My brother went to warn you, but he never returned." Her stomach sank. She thought of the gray-haired man who had found her by the river, the one who said he was Taz's blood. She wanted to speak, to tell him, but the look in Taz's eyes stopped her. There would be time for truth later if they survived the night. He turned to Keone and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You did well," he said in Apache. Keone's eyes lit with pride, though the fear beneath still lingered. They made camp near the ridge, keeping the fire low. The wind was rising, bringing with it the scent of smoke from far away. Taza said little, but the way he kept glancing toward the horizon told her enough. He was expecting trouble. As the darkness deepened, he spoke softly. "They will come. The soldiers, maybe my own people too. They believe your being alive is the reason for our suffering." She looked down, the firelight flickering across her face. "And you? What do you believe?" Taza stared into the flames. "I believe the land decides who is cursed and who is blessed, not men." Silence stretched between them, heavy and full of unspoken things. She wanted to reach for him, to say that she never meant for any of this to happen. But before she could speak, a sound cut through the wind, a horse's cry. Sharp and close, Taza was on his feet instantly, drawing his knife. "Get down," he hissed. Keone pressed against her side as Taza moved to the edge of the rocks. The woman's heartbeat thundered in her ears. In the distance, faint lights moved, torches. Scattered and shifting, like stars crawling over the land. "They've found us," he said. The torches grew brighter, their glow reflecting off rifles and metal buckles. There were at least 10 riders, maybe more, moving in a line that curved around the canyon floor. The soldiers had tracked them well. Taza motioned for her to move deeper into the rocks, but she hesitated. "We can't outrun them," she whispered. "Not with Keone." Taza's jaw clenched. "Then we make them believe we already ran." He worked quickly, scattering footprints across the sand in every direction, leading false trails toward the north. The woman helped him, brushing away signs of their camp until only the faintest trace remained. By the time the soldiers reached the canyon's edge, the fire was gone. The air heavy with dust and deception, they hid high in the rocks. The woman clutching Keone close as the riders below spread out. Voices echoed faintly, orders barked, boots striking stone. One of the men carried a lantern that swung from his saddle, casting long, crooked shadows on the cliffs. Another dismounted and crouched, touching the ground where Taza had walked. "Tracks," he called. "They're close." Her breath hitched. Taza pressed a hand gently over hers, signaling her to stay still. The soldiers moved toward the northern path, following the false trail. For a moment, she dared to hope they would pass. But then one man paused, his lantern swinging toward their hiding place. The light caught something, an old rifle, but glinting between the rocks. "Up there," he shouted. The world erupted into motion. Taza fired the first shot, his rifle cracking through the night. The sound echoed like thunder. Horses reared, men shouted, and chaos filled the canyon. The woman ducked low, shielding Keone as sparks from gunfire lit the darkness. Dust filled her lungs, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. Taza moved like a shadow, reloading with practiced speed, using the rocks for cover. He was outnumbered, but his shots were true, forcing the soldiers to scatter. The woman reached for Harper's rifle and aimed low, firing once, then again. She didn't know if she'd hit anything, but it was enough to drive the men back for a moment. The fight felt endless, but soon she heard the sound that chilled her more than the gunfire. The shrill call of a horn. Reinforcements. More soldiers were coming. Taza dropped beside her, reloading his last bullet. "We can't stay," he said. "We climb." He pulled her in. Keone toward the narrow trail leading up the cliffs. The climb was steep, every step sending loose stones tumbling down. Below them, the soldiers regrouped, shouting as they began to follow. The woman's arms burned, her breath ragged, but she kept going. She couldn't stop. Not now. Halfway up, Keone slipped, crying out as his foot struck a rock. The sound drew attention. A bullet whistled past, striking the stone beside them. Taza turned, firing back, before pulling the boy into his arms. "Go," he urged the woman. "Keep climbing." By the time they reached the top, dawn was breaking. The horizon glowed with faint light, casting the desert in hues of red and gold. Below, the soldiers were still climbing, their shouts carried by the wind. The woman collapsed to her knees, her body trembling. Taza crouched beside her, scanning the distance. "We'll make for the old caves," he said. "They're hidden beyond the ridge. They won't find us there." She nodded, too exhausted to speak. Together they pressed forward, Keone limping beside them. The wind howled through the narrow pass, carrying dust and the smell of burning powder. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter. But they didn't dare slow down. By midday, they reached the cave's deep, jagged openings carved into the side of a cliff. Inside, it was cool and dark, the air thick with the scent of damp stone. They found a corner to rest, far from the entrance. The woman sank against the wall, her body aching, her mind a blur of fear and exhaustion. Taza knelt nearby, cleaning his rifle with steady hands. His silence was heavy, his face drawn and shadowed. Finally, she spoke. "They won't stop, will they?" "No," he said quietly. "Not until they believe the desert has taken you." She looked down, her hand resting over her belly. "Then maybe it's time we stop running." He turned toward her, his eyes searching hers. "You don't understand. If we stay, they will find us. And if my people reach us first, they will take you back for judgment." "Then we face them," she said. "Both of them. I'm tired of hiding." Taz's gaze softened, but sorrow lingered there. "You are strong," he said. "Stronger than I ever knew. But this land is cruel to those who defy it." Before she could answer, a sound echoed faintly from the mouth of the cave horse's whinny, low and cautious. Taza stood, his hand moving to his knife. Keone stiffened. The woman held her breath, straining to listen. Voices followed, distant but drawing closer. She couldn't tell if they were soldiers or Apache, only that they were many. The light at the cave's entrance flickered as shadows passed by. Taza motioned for silence. He crept to the edge, peering out, then froze. His jaw tightened, his hand gripping the blade until his knuckles turned white. When he turned back to her, his voice was low. "It's not the soldiers, then. Who?" she whispered. He looked toward the entrance again. "My people." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Outside, the sound of drums began a slow, steady rhythm that rolled through the canyon like thunder. The woman's heart pounded as the reality set in. The tribe had found them. Taz's eyes met hers. And in that look was every choice they had made, every moment that had led them to this place. "They have come for you," he said. "And for you?" she asked. He didn't answer. The drums grew louder, joined by the low hum of chanting voices. The firelight from the torches outside began to glow against the cave walls. The woman stood, one hand steadying herself against the rock, the other pressed protectively over her belly. There was no more running now. The desert, the soldiers, the tribe, they had all closed in. The air felt charged, thick with everything unsaid, every secret and promise hanging in the balance. The next few moments would decide not just their fate, but the life of the child yet to be born. Taza took one last breath, his voice low and steady. "Whatever happens, do not speak. Let me face them first." Outside, a voice shouted his name. Strong and commanding, Taza stepped toward the light. The woman followed, her heart breaking and unbroken all at once, knowing that what came next would change everything. The sound of chanting grew stronger as Taza stepped out into the fading light, his shadow stretching long against the rocks. The woman stood behind him, the wind pulling gently at her hair, the desert glowing gold around them. Below the ridge, dozens of Apache warriors waited, faces painted, eyes burning with questions that needed no words. At their head stood an older man draped in a dark blanket, his expression carved from stone. "Taza," the elder called, his voice deep and steady. "You have broken our laws. You have hidden the white woman who brought ruin to our land." Taza's shoulders squared, his voice calm but unwavering. "She is not the cause of our suffering. The soldiers burned the valley because they feared us. Blaming her will not heal the land." The warriors murmured among themselves. The elder's gaze shifted toward the woman who now stood in full view. Her hands were clasped in front of her, trembling slightly, but her eyes did not waver. "You do not belong here," the elder said to her. "Yet you walk among us, as if the earth itself has claimed you." "She saved my life," Keone spoke suddenly from behind her, his small voice carrying across the canyon. The elder turned sharply toward the boy. "When the soldiers came, she gave me food, shelter, and helped me find my way back to Taza. She is not our enemy." A quiet fell over the group. The elder studied Keone for a long time, then looked back at Taza. "Your brother would have said the same," he said slowly. "But he is gone because of her." Taza's jaw tightened, pain flickering across his face. "My brother died protecting what he believed in. He would not want his death used to feed hatred." The woman felt her heart ache at the sound of his voice. She had carried so much guilt, believing herself to be the reason for so much loss. But in that moment, she saw the truth in his words. The land had taken from everyone, not just her. The elder stepped closer, the wind lifting his gray hair. "You would defy your own people for her." "I would stand for what is right," Taza said, "even if it means standing alone." The warriors stirred again, some nodding quietly, others looking uncertain. The elder's gaze lingered on Taza for a long moment before he finally turned to the woman. "If you remain," he said, "the soldiers will come again. They will bring fire, death, and chains. You will bring nothing but danger to these people." "I know," she said softly, "but I can't run anymore. I didn't ask for this war, but I won't let others pay for it. If my presence brings danger, then let me face it beside the ones who showed me mercy." Her voice trembled, but the honesty in it silenced even the wind. The elder looked at her as if weighing her soul. "You would stay in a land that does not forgive easily." "I would stay because it's the only place I've ever been seen as more than someone's property," she said. That word property hung in the air like a wound reopened. Taz's eyes flickered to her, remembering the sign that had once hung over her chains. The memory cut through both of them, sharp and bitter. The elder finally nodded. "Then let the spirits judge you both," he said. "Not me." He turned to the warriors behind him. "We will leave them. If the soldiers come, the desert will decide their fate." One by one, the men began to turn away, melting back into the rocks and sand. The chanting faded into the distance until only the whisper of the wind remained. When the last figure disappeared beyond the ridge, Taza let out a long breath. He looked at the woman, his expression unreadable. "You spoke with courage," he said quietly. "I only spoke what was true," she replied. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was peace uneasy, fragile but real. They stayed in the caves for several days, gathering what little food they had left and tending to their wounds. The woman helped Keone heal from his fall, wrapping his ankle and teaching him how to walk on it again. Taza kept watch through the nights, always alert, always ready as the days passed. The rhythm of the desert slowly returned to them. The sky stretched wide, the wind carried distant songs, and life found its quiet balance again. But the peace could not last forever. One morning, as the sun rose pale over the cliffs, Taza spotted movement in the valley below, a small line of riders dressed in blue. The soldiers had found their trail again. He turned to the woman, his voice steady but urgent. "They're coming. We must move." She looked down at Keone, who still limped, then back toward the horizon. "If we keep running, they'll never stop," she said. "They'll keep hunting until there's nothing left to chase."
Asa.
Taza paused, then nodded slowly. "Then we ended here." They moved down to the dry riverbed, setting what little cover they could find. The soldiers drew closer, their voices echoing off the canyon walls. The woman loaded the rifle, her hands steady now. She'd been afraid for so long that fear itself no longer controlled her. When the riders finally came into view, Taza stepped forward with his hands raised. The woman watched tense as the officer at the front raised his weapon. "We're not here to fight," Taza called out. "There's no one left for you to take." The officer laughed coldly. "You harbor a fugitive and think that makes you innocent." The woman stepped out from behind the rocks. "If it's me you want, take me. Leave him and the boy." The soldiers hesitated, surprised to see her. The officer's expression changed as he recognized Hertha, woman once chained beneath a sign that read property. His voice lowered. "You were supposed to be dead." "Maybe I was," she said, "but I belong to no one now." Her words carried through the canyon like a promise. The soldiers shifted uneasily, their faces uncertain. Taza stood beside her, unarmed but unyielding. For a long moment, no one moved. The desert held its breath, Then, from behind the soldiers, another voice called out. A messenger had arrived, carrying orders from the nearest outpost. The war is over, he shouted. The prisoners are to be released. We return to Fort Bowie at dawn. The officer lowered his weapon, disbelief flickering in his eyes. Slowly, he turned his horse away. One by one, the soldiers followed, their figures fading into the horizon. When the last rider disappeared, the woman felt her knees weaken. Taza caught her as she stumbled, his arms steady around her. She looked up at him, tears streaking through the dust on her cheeks. It's done, she whispered. He nodded. The land will heal now. They stayed there until the light faded, watching the sunset turn the desert to gold. The wind was calm, the silence deep and full of meaning. Keone sat nearby, tracing shapes in the sand, humming softly to himself. For the first time, the woman felt something she had not known in years: freedom, not as a gift, but as something she had earned. She thought of all she had endured, the chains, the pain, the endless running, and realized that it all led her here, to this quiet moment of peace beside the man who had risked everything for her. Taza broke the silence. When I first saw you beneath that sign, I thought the spirits were mocking me. Now I see they were guiding me. She smiled faintly. Maybe they were guiding both of us. In the days that followed, they built a small shelter near the river, where the land was kind and the nights were soft with the sound of water. The tribe never returned, and the soldiers never came again. The world beyond the desert moved on, but for them, time slowed. Sometimes travelers passed through, speaking of new towns rising, of railroads cutting across the plains, of the world changing faster than anyone could stop it. But for Taza and the woman, the desert remained their home, a place of scars and forgiveness, silence and truth. As seasons turned, the river grew stronger, carving new paths through the land. Life returned to the valley, the hawks, the deer, the wildflowers, and among them, a new beginning quietly took root. Years later, when people spoke of the Apache warrior and the woman who once was bound by chains, they said the desert had claimed them both, turning their story into legend. But those who wandered far enough into the valley sometimes swore they could still see smoke rising at dusk, the faint shape of a fire burning near the river and two shadows sitting side by side, watching the sun fade behind the mountains. And maybe that was the truth, that the land had not taken them, but kept them as part of its endless story of loss and redemption. In the heart of that quiet desert, where pain had once lived, love and freedom finally found their place. Top of form, bottom of form,